Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to the tank review on the Ferdinand. Finally, I have come around and made a tank review on this fantastic tank, and there has never been a better time to make a tank review than the last few weeks. And why is that? I will come to in a moment. The Ferdinand is a fantastic German tank destroyer at rank 4 with a battle rating of 6.3, and it has a fantastic 88mm Pak 43 cannon with 50 rounds in total. Overall, this is a monstrosity, a behemoth, and an absolute seal clubber if you know what you're doing. How to take this tank out, but also how to make it work on the battlefield, will be a part of this tank review, together with some ace tanker gameplay in both realistic and arcade. And well, the strength and weaknesses, the dirty little hidden secrets of this tank lie, I will come to in a moment. Now, I think I have to make a good introduction for you to understand where I'm going to. By itself, the tank is okay, not overpowered, not too powerless. It has its strength and weaknesses, but in fact, in the matter of War Thunder, especially in realistic, these days with the 6.7 German lineup being disappearing more and more, especially with the Henschel Jagdtiger suffering, you might get the impression that German tanks in general at tier 4 are weak. That's not the case, and certain changes actually have profited the Ferdinand, and especially the T-29 might get really confused when they have really big problems killing a Ferdinand that just puts round after round into them up until they die. And the next two tanks that really kind of fear this tank are the Russian IS-2 Mod 1944 and the premium version together with the IS-6, because both have to suddenly aim carefully to do massive damage to this tank. And even then, it's not guaranteed to put this tank out of action. And where all this insanity comes from should be part of this tank review. So, I think that is a good introduction and a little history lesson for you. The Ferdinand is of course one of the oldest tanks in War Thunder. It was there from the beginning and I always loved it. And that was the very old meta when it just was Russians versus Germans. Then numerous additions were made to the game, new ammunition types like APDS and HeatFS, and then also new nations like the Americans and the British and the Japanese appeared in the game. And the kind of meta ways for the Ferdinand were up and down and up and down. But the most important steps were the addition of the post-war shell for the IS-2 Mod 1944 and the Revenge. And yeah, then now it got removed again to actually allow the IS-2 to receive a battle rating of 6.3, which is really nice. And that all in conjunction with several other battle rating changes and move-arounds within the various different tank tech trees actually profits the Ferdinand. And why is that? Well, simply it is most of the time top tier, and even when it is not top tier, it can really hold itself. Unlike the Tiger 2 Henschel nowadays, which comes as a surprise, as some of the weaknesses that the Tiger 2 Henschel nowadays has once were part of the Ferdinand's weaknesses, and that will be part of the tank review as well. So I think that's enough rambling and theorizing and history rambling. Let's get on with the tank review. So, as usual, I will begin with the armor, and that is practically the selling point of the Ferdinand. First of all, the lower plate is here 80mm thick, sloped backwards at nearly 40 degrees, giving it just an effective thickness of around about 120mm. But you can see this interlocking structure here, and so that means another part of the lower plate is actually 100mm thick with an effective thickness of 150mm. And then the lower plate, I know this is a bit confusing, seems to be just 100mm, but this is add-on armor. You see those bolts? This is add-on armor, so we have 100 plus 100 giving 200mm, and we are looking here together with an angle of around about 35 degrees, about 220, 230mm of effective armor. Furthermore, this is add-on armor. That means that hash rounds will not go through. When you get hit here by the FV 4005 stage 2, you don't get blown up. You might burn, you might lose crew member because of the concussion and, you know, certain shrapnels disabling also your cannon barrel and so on, but you will not blow up. Then we have this kind of step here that is 80 millimeters thick. That means this part here is safe from most HE shells. Maybe some 105 millimeter HES shells might do damage, but not too much, to be honest. The stage 2 then does here also splash down. And we also have here this flat 100 plus 100 millimeters. You can see here the second plate. So that is 200 millimeters of effective thickness. And when you do a little bit of angling like this, it's already above the penetration values of the Russian 122 millimeter BR 471B. But the APHE shell from, for example, also the long 88 in arcade, but also the 105 millimeter gun from the T29 will go through here. Then there are those side cheeks, and they are 80 millimeters thick, but they are heavily angled. It seems like 45 degrees, so the effective thickness is 120 millimeters, 130 millimeters. I will come to them back in a moment. Then we also have some hidden features like this additional tracks, and also this kind of step here, that seems to just be 25 millimeters. But to be honest, to hit it from the front is a very tricky shot, and then mostly not really rewarding. Most of the time the shell will hit the tracks or this part here that will just not allow it to go through. So this is a weak spot. For example, T-34-85s will be able to penetrate here from the front. Again, if you angle it a little bit, then you have this strengthened up to 180 millimeters, but then you neglect the angle of this plate here, and then you suddenly have just around about 100 and 105 millimeters of thickness. And that brings us then to the engine deck, because the engine is in the front, and we have here a strange arrangement of plates. We have just around about here 20 millimeters of armor. That is not very thick, to be honest, especially because we have it here, but the middle part is 80 millimeters thick, so that is strong again. That's extremely strong for deck armor, to be honest. And then also the top here is 30 millimeters. That's okayish, to be honest. So why is this 20 millimeters so important to know? Well, because of one reason, and that is that you have here 200 millimeters of armor. And those 200 millimeters of armor are sloped backwards at 20 degrees. The effective thickness is 211 millimeters, and that is very important. It is a huge area to hit, and it's flat, so APDS and APCR and heat shells and APHE shells and AP shells have no problem interacting with the armor, but they have problems going through because of the sheer thickness. Again, we are there where at longer ranges suddenly a lot of APHE rounds, especially again from the Russian 122 millimeter, will have problems going through. Even the long 88 with its 235 millimeters has problems, especially when you use your 8 degrees of gun depression and you're like this. You see how the effective thickness goes up to 220 millimeters? A little bit of side angling when you're hull down, and suddenly you are approaching 240 millimeters. And your side armor is also 80 and 85 millimeters thick with a little bit of angling. You can see it right here. A little bit of angling directly from the side is around about 100 millimeters of effective thickness. And the side here is rather flat and just 80 millimeters. We have some additional tracks and so on, but that's not really that important. Furthermore, we have here on the rear 25 millimeters of armor. So just 122 millimeter HE shells will reliably go through. For example, the HE shell from the T-34 has 28 millimeters of penetration, but for some bizarre reason does not go through or does not splash upwards. Now again, we're talking here about splash damage, and that is why I mentioned those 20 millimeters. If you splash here with shells that have 20 millimeters of penetration with the HE rounds, you should go through, right? Not quite. That includes a lot of the 105 millimeter guns, for example the 105 on the 10.5 centimeter Jagdtiger or the T29, and they will not go through. They have also 20 millimeters of penetration, but they will not go through here. They will not splash down. However, 122 millimeters have 36 millimeters of penetration with the HE rounds, like the Germans 128 millimeters. So keep that in mind. Talking about big guns, we have here the gun shield of this Long 88 together with some gun holding, and that is spaced armor before an additional holding ring that is 80 millimeters, and still behind that is 200 millimeters, so that is 280 millimeters with an effective thickness of over 300 millimeters. So this shield, a special mention to it. When you wiggle your tank at longer ranges, it is incredible how many shots get eaten up by this. It's incredible. Now you see the roof here, and you might think, well, I can penetrate here, but for some bizarre reason this doesn't work. Another final word to this armor plating here. You have here a problem when you are on a slope downwards, because then the angle gets neglected and you have 200 millimeters of effective thickness, and then suddenly everything goes through. The 20-pounder solid AP shot, then also the 122 millimeter BR471B, not the normal BR471, that does not go through. And yeah, so keep that in mind. That is very important for your playstyle. The rear of the tank is also 80 millimeters everywhere with various angles. So that's the armor. What about the interior? Aha, there we go. And we have 6 crew members. In the front are sitting the machine gunner and the driver. And in the fighting compartment, we see the gunner, the commander, a loader, and another loader. So we have 2 loaders for a single piece ammunition, with not the highest caliber. We'll come to this back in a moment. And then we also see that there are the engines, 2 of them delivering 530 horsepower. We have some radiators and the fuel tanks. So it's kind of reversed because the transmission is in the back. So you kind of see it's reversed. For normal German tanks, you have the engine right about here and the transmission in the front. So that means when you penetrate this tank, a lot of shrapnel will kill those 2 guys and probably set the engine on fire. So you will burn a lot. So the fire prevention equipment is a must-have in a Ferdinand, an absolute must-have, especially because you want to take damage for the rest of your team. Then the repair times are very long and so on. Then we also see those ammo racks hanging, and that just shows how long those shells are, or the propellant charges. And yeah, if you want to remove half of your ammunition, like 25 rounds, those 2 ammo racks are empty, and that prevents you from head-on ammo racks a lot. But remember, on the other side, those ammo racks never get empty. That is the last one to get emptied. And guess what? That is always the one that blows up. I guarantee you, that is always the one that receives a few shrapnels and blows up, according to the kill cam. So you can see that the tank has tough armor, and it is just incredible. Now, one final thing is, you see those 80 millimeters here and those 200 millimeters there. And that just screams like angle, angle, angle it. I say no, because of 2 reasons. First of all, as we can see here, the effective thickness increases to 260 and 230 millimeters, including the armor interaction rules. This is around about the optimal angle, and yes, it is strong. However, then you make the angle on this plate here flatter, and that just then gives the enemy an easier time penetrating here. But if the enemy chooses to shoot you here, he immobilizes you. And that is a problem because of the gun firing angle. And it's like just like firing here and here, which is around about 7-8 degrees to each side. That is not a lot. You are not a tortoise in this respect. So keep that in mind. So, but I think that's enough with the armor and the X-ray view. Let's get on to some other comparisons. Before we can talk about advanced tactics in the tank gameplay or talk about the firepower and shell comparison, we obviously need to talk about the mobility and maneuverability of the tank, and both are not very convincing. So we just have a 530 horsepower pair of engines for a 65-ton tank. So all in all, we have 8.2 horsepower per ton. That is bad. That is tortoise bad. However, the tortoise is even better in maneuverability to a certain degree. So the top speed of the Ferdinand is also not the highest, 31 kilometers an hour, but you kind of expect this from such a low horsepower to ton ratio. What you don't expect is the absolute insanity that is the reverse speed of also minus 31 kilometers an hour. For some bizarre reason, also how the gear shifts, it feels like you go much faster backwards than you go forwards. But I might think this is a deceiving feeling. So the kind of transmission and all that was very advanced back in the time, talking about the real tank here. Actually, you had a pair of engines together producing 530 horsepowers. Then they actually propelled some generators that produced electricity, which then actually gave energy to some electric motors. So that is kind of a weird thing, because in reality the tank also liked to burn, but because of from a mechanical failure standpoint of perspective. That was why the VK 4501P actually never could win the competition against the Jagdtiger model. So just a little bit of history there for you. But that's not all. Weird is that you actually have to shift gears in this respect and how they actually shift. Because of the bad horsepower to ton ratio, the maneuverability is absolutely disastrous. Taking a corner, seeing an enemy and trying to change your direction takes ages. In this respect, even the Doom Turtle is better, and the Tortoise outclasses the Ferdinand by a mile. In close quarters, this tank is just simply a turtle on its back. That's what it is. And that means you need to do a little bit of different test driving. The most effective way for a normal tank to change its direction to turn is in 4th gear normally. But in this tank, on hard or very good terrain overall, it's 3rd gear. And on a slope or bad terrain, it's just 2nd gear. And sometimes the tank doesn't even have the horsepower to turn there, so you need to do it with neutral steering. But at least the tank has that. So that gives you kind of an impression how bad it is and how you have to train with it. And that's for a fully upgraded tank. So for a stock tank, it's absolutely outrageous. And so the engine upgrades actually do not make the tank really fast, but they actually make it maneuverable. So in this respect, the tracks seem to have an awful amount of drag and yet just are synced into the dirt, the ground. That's the only explanation that I have for that. It's absolutely outrageous. But let's come from the bad to the good. Let's talk about the firepower. And finally, we see some good stats, because we have the long 88 in the anti-tank role, and that is the PAK 43 cannon. And that is also very similar to the Jagdpanther, and also not very unsimilar to the Su-100, the Russian tank destroyer at 6.7. And it is also a gun that has a lot of ammunition, 50 rounds. And that is a bit surprising that you don't have more ammunition than the Jagdpanther, which is overall a smaller vehicle, which has 60 rounds. But here comes the clue. We have 8.3 seconds reload instead of 8.5. 8.5 is also the reload for any other long 88 in the game for the Germans, and that has to do that the Ferdinand is the only tank within the German tech tree that has a long 88 and 2 loaders. That means also when you're down to just 2 crew members, you kind of keep that reload. You have a bit of penalty for loss of the commander, but overall you don't have the long reload, for example when the Jagdpanther is down to 2 crew members. So you have this kind of loader bug. The turret rotation speed is sadly not the best with 8.0 degrees, so you're massively outclassed by the charioteer, but that is kind of a turret. The gun depression with -8 degrees is really great actually, but it's not the fantastic normal golden standard of -10 degrees that you find on the tortoise. The gun elevation with 14 degrees is adequate, and the elevation speed is also your average 4 degrees per second. So what does this mean? Well, you fire a shot every 8.3 seconds and you can stay alive for a very long time and you still keep your bite. So the 2.4 percentage difference to the Jagdpanther initially is not that feelable, but when the battle is going on and you lose more and more crew members, you go into a capture zone and replenish one of your crew members, then it gets taken out again by an unlucky hit, you still keep your firepower, you keep your bite, and the tank is just out of action when it is actually dead. And that is actually the magic of the Ferdinand. Because of having the battle rating of 6.3 and getting not so often up tiered, you see a lot of lower tiered vehicles because you're so often top tier and you're top tier. And that means you see a lot of the British tanks and a lot of the Russian tanks, and they just don't have the armor to withstand you and don't have the guns to reliably do damage to you. And that is just brutalizing them. And let's have a look at the actual shells. The first shell type is the Panzergranate 39-43, which is an APCBC armor-piercing capped ballistic capped shell. And that is a very good shell and probably the shell that you will use like 95% of the time. It is a 10 kilogram heavy warhead with a muzzle velocity of 1000 meters per second, that is very good, a TNT equivalent of 108.8 grams, and furthermore a fuse delay of 0.8 meters, but a fuse sensitivity of 28 millimeters. That is the typical German fuse sensitivity. That means you actually cause a lot of over-penetrations against weakly armored targets. But the real magic comes in at the penetration. 235 millimeters is really great, and at 1000 meters you have still 204 millimeters. That is the close penetration, or the penetration at 10 meters for the APHE shell from the American long-barreled 90 millimeters. So you have 1000 meters advantage for this shell. But the problem is it is a low caliber, so it is not very good in terms of the armor interaction rules and overmatch and so on, and it will very often bounce if you do not really hit flat armor. But the rate of fire together with the TNT equivalent of high explosive filling really makes this shell powerful. The second shell type, which is also stock, is the SBRGR, or in German Sprenggranate, which is a high explosive shell. It is 11 kilogram heavy warhead with 820 meters per second muzzle velocity. That is not too good, but the TNT equivalent is 935 grams, and that actually is over the 700 gram threshold, so you can initiate some hull breaks, especially on lightly armored AAA vehicles. The fuse sensitivity is 0.5 millimeters, so it explodes nearly everywhere. Then we also just have a penetration of 13 millimeters at any distance and at any angle. But overall the caliber is just too low to give a very big punch. That brings us to the third shell type, which is the HLGR39, or in German Hochladungsgranate 39, which is a heat shell. And that seems on the first look not too impressive. Just 600 meters per second is a really low muzzle velocity for this 7.6 kilogram warhead, and the TNT equivalent is 1.1 kilograms. That is also practically or theoretically enough to initiate hull break, and you also have the heat beam effect. But it is also difficult to aim, to lead, and so on, and you just have 110 millimeters of penetration. That is just something for specialists, for some very, very special situations that rarely occur, but it is a tier 2 upgrade, and you can experiment around with it, but I didn't find any real practical use, except the one in arcade. When your gun barrel is blown up, you then still can do damage with this against some tanks that try to drive into cover sideways on, probably. That's the only use that I can think of. I've done this in my Tiger tank review. I did a tutorial in it, so you might look that up. And that brings us to the fourth shell type, which is a follow-up researchable shell at tier 4. So you need to research the heat shell to get the Panzergranate 40-43, which is an APCR shell. It is a 7.3 kilogram warhead with a good muzzle velocity of 1200 meters per second for an APCR round, and it kind of has the standard average penetration for kind of this caliber of APCR rounds of 271 millimeters at 10 meters. But again, it doesn't have too much use. Maybe if you might encounter a lot of T-29s at long range or IS-6s and want to go through the turret because you don't feel comfortable with shot trapping them, this might be your best option, but I rarely use it myself. That brings us to the last datasheet, and that just compares all the shells between the Ferdinand, the Jagdpanther, the SU-100, the Tortoise, the Type 60 SPRG, the T-95, and the Charentier Mark 7. And you can see the long 88 just must not or does not have to hide itself from its main competitors at this battle rating, and even a little bit above. It can hold itself. The ammunition supply, the reload, the survivability, all that is really, really great. You might just pause the video and look through it yourself if you have a particular interest in this datasheet. And yeah, I think the long 88, together with the chassis, together with the armor, and with the right support from the team, just it adds up. You just have no way to complain about the gun. And that brings us here to Sinai and to realistic battles, of course. This is actually not the battle that I want to show you. The thing is, I think, as you saw right now, standing in the open where the enemy is kind of in one direction with turning and just doing mind tricks with the enemy is something that the Ferdinand can do very well. I observe all the spots. I always do not look in the center of my screen, so don't think that I always look in the center of the screen where I choose to look into direction. This is very important because of the various different camera angles, and maybe I want to observe two spots at the same time. This is very, very important. Now you could see I also received a hit from a KV-2 in the side and survived it, but you also saw the insane repair times with which a lot of the German tanks are cursed with, and that ultimately brings them death and destruction. To help a German tank out that gets a lot of its performance from survivability is very important. So again, help them to repair and don't be the first one to die. So in this respect, you then can go and perform your duties in the shadow of a Ferdinand, or at higher tiers a Jagdtiger, and maybe you can have some easy pickings when you concentrate on those tanks that concentrate on the Ferdinand, especially as a medium tank. Now you could see I observed multiple 122mm shots from a range of around about 400 meters, 500 meters and above. So the Ferdinand is a force to count on. And so, as you can see, the M6A1 finally got around to kill not just the IS-2 but also another Russian tank, and now I can simply advance. At this moment, I think the overwhelming majority of the exciting part of this match is over, so I make here a cut and then we will go into the final match of today. Well, I have to say there were some quick cleanup kills at the end of the match. First on this PT-76. By the way, the heat shell from the PT-76 can't challenge your front. It has exactly 200 millimeters, and even from the Pershings, the 210 millimeter heat shell from the 90 millimeter has difficulties dealing with your front at all, except if you're angled in a weird way. That actually was now my next kill, and I think it secured me the ace. And then a few minutes later, some people just refused to just simply go out of the match, and they insisted on respawning. There were no other tanks on the maps, just some aircraft also flying around, so we just simply cleaned them up. First kill on this Su-57, not a real challenge to be honest, especially from the side, and the next shot goes into the Su-152 for the 7th kill. The final gameplay of today's tank review is here on Normandy, and it's quite a nice match. I had some really nice matches on this map, and one of them was this with the highest kill score of today, where I also survived the match. Now I see here this T-44 and this T-44-100, and the shell goes in and cleans all crew members with one shot. When this long 88mm APHE shell works, it's fantastic, but it's also kind of frustrating when it doesn't work. But I guess that's every gun in the game. So I'm advancing here with a Panther F and also a Jagdtiger. The Jagdtiger has all the attention, but he suffers from a long reload, so that's where I'm coming in handy, also having a lot of armor and also having a good gun but with a faster reload. And you can see here I'm quite drifting to the right. That's the weakness. That's one of the weaknesses. You do not really interact with the environment too well. Every turn that you have to make is always painful, I have to say, but overall we're advancing. We want to secure A. We go here near the statue because from that you have cover and also a good field of fire. The Jagdtiger breaches in first into the concrete fences and finds his first customer, which seems to be a Russian medium tank. He fires but misses, but I make the killing shot and kill this T-54-47 from the side on the hull. That's not too difficult. I look around and just think to myself, what can I do? And you can see here we have a lot of guns, we have teamwork here. That is the thing that you have to keep in mind. When you make something like this, you always can, you know, just kill all the opponents that seem to be dangerous for some of your teammates. And we also advance in a good front line. This is the key to success, especially with tanks such as the Jagdtiger, the Ferdinand and the Jagdtiger in particular. You're very strong from the front, but you also have to control your surrounding, because your mobility and maneuverability is not always the best in comparison to other nations' heavy tanks or tank destroyers. Now, you do not have to see the Ferdinand particularly as a tank destroyer, because many tanks with much less armor can fulfill that role. But what the Ferdinand has going for it is the amount of armor, especially for the front together with the durability. That means it's more of an assault gun. Now, where's the difference? Well, an assault gun can perform as a tank destroyer and an assault gun or a heavy tank substitute therefore, and that gives it actually for the absolute battle a bit more flexibility, but not in terms of maneuverability. That is always kind of the part that I have to point out. Please don't get carried away from kind of your success in some kind of street fighting, especially when you can hide one of your cheeks behind a bit of rubble where you can shoot over and you can angle the rest of your hull to the maximum of your gun traverse angle, so to speak. Make use of your reverse gear. Always look on the map, where is the rest of your team, and just reverse into help, or reverse out of tricky situations, or reverse to help other teammates. Furthermore, about the maneuverability, it is actually better to reverse turn than to turn for the front. Now in this case I wanted to help out this Jagdtiger, but you kind of can see where the difficulties lie with the flexibility of this tank. It really doesn't have it in terms of maneuverability, and that actually makes it possible for this T-44 or this T-54 to get away with it. I tried a cupola shot, very tricky shot to make on the left hand side cupola. I see this Type 62 very dangerous tank simple to delete, so I do it. I reverse again and have a look on the right hand side, and now the left hand side, the Tiger 2 gets taken out, so now I'm in a bit of trouble actually, but I wait for the shot and hope that on the right hand side the guy does not come around. I aim for the cupola, save first shot, and I take out the gunner and the commander. Very, very important hit. And you know, I'm not taking my chances. Second shell goes in and secures me the kill. And then there is this PT-76, and all he did was aim for the mid plate, which is flat 200mm, and he just killed the radio operator, and one hit actually deletes the object. Nano 6, I was wrong. It looked like a PT-76 on at first look, but I deleted him. So yeah, that just shows kind of how this tank can deal with shells that actually do tremendous amounts of damage to a Jagdtiger or a Jagdtiger, for example, which is surprising. So, and I have mentioned that I can survive a hit from a FV 4005 when he hits the plating, because you might just burn, but you don't blow up. And that is actually one of the differences that I noticed lately. In former times, it was always the Ferdinand that blew up when receiving an engine or a fuel tank hit. Now it's the Jagdtiger series, all of them, including the diesel Jagdtiger, because reasons. And the Ferdinand now just burns, but it doesn't blow up anymore. Eventually it will blow up when you don't extinguish the fire in time, but overall it is kind of a renaissance of this tank, and I absolutely love it. If you had difficulties spading your Ferdinand, now is the time. Now the matchmaker is really nice to you, and there is an IS-3, and he foolishly chooses to take out the Panther F. One thing that I had noticed with the Long 88, that it is actually inaccurate. It is actually inaccurate, and that is very, very surprising. Now I choose to actually charge the IS-3 knowing of his long reload, and I need to make the killing blow, and finally I hit the driver's hatch, and I'm very lucky that the shell doesn't bounce. Again, it is kind of a caliber thing. I actually hit the mid part of the driver's hatch that allows me to make the connection for the entrance of the shell into the tank. As tough as Russian tanks might be sometimes for penetrating them at all with regular rounds, they are not so kind of good with their survivability. And that is something that you need to keep in mind. Whenever you can make a side shot on a tank, aim either for the crew compartment for a Russian tank, or aim for the ammunition, for example on the T-29. The middle ammo rack always blows up. Strangely, not the frontal ammunition rack, but the middle one will do. Now again, it is kind of surprising for especially T-29 drivers when they face a Ferdinand, because suddenly at certain angles or in certain situations they fail to go through with the APHE round. And then the Ferdinand has the insane ability to survive the first shell hit sometimes. He might just burn because you always burn when get hit, which makes your 2 kind of fire extinguishers very precious, to be honest, or just go into the drink, for example, here on the ocean. You know, it's always an idea to reverse back into the ocean when you're burning, if you have the possibility, that is. It's just a possibility, but you always have to keep it in mind as well. And so you can see I reverse into the cap circle, facing with my armor and my gun towards the expected threat. And capturing gives a lot of experience and silver lines, and also wins you games. At this moment there was not much for me to do, and that was the second base that I actually captured. And I reversed further. And then I thought to myself, where will the enemies be? I observed the planes and the minimap for any sign of the IS-2, and then decided, well, maybe I should go sideways and not stay in the open where he could come from 2 different angles. And then, with the last moment, I actually spotted this Russian medium tank. So that again is situational awareness. He could have simply killed me with 1 side shot, especially when hitting the ammunition, because German ammunition very reliably blows up. And I shoot through this thing, whatever it was, this wooden object, and I hit his gun breech. And now let's see how good the Ferdinand is at charging. Now I try to get speed and I lose all my speed in the turning. I accelerate again, turn then again. He moves and tries to hide behind this dead Jagdtiger, and I know I have to put pressure on him. I bounced the first round, but he had not repaired it, and I knew that the gun breech is black. In arcade it would be a problem, because he has a 1 in 3 chance to actually make it, but now I killed the loader and the commander, and that for sure increases his repair time, if at all. He has not repaired at all, and I go for the throat shot, and that was my 7th kill. So that was an amazing match so far, and now I have to get away with it. The good thing was now that nobody really knows where I am. They just saw this, probably from their perspective, blue dot disappearing, and that is the best kind of engagement. And the grave mistake that the T-44-100 made here was, first of all, to not run away completely, and also to just not hit me with the machine guns, because that would have given my position away and potentially would have caused some ambush by an IS-2. And I really was kind of afraid of this IS-2, that he comes from behind. And I wanted some intel from my team. Maybe a plane strafing him, maybe a medium tank have spotted him and now pinging the map. There are not so many enemy tanks left alive. So at this moment I knew I had a good match, but now I was actually afraid of dying. Now this is debatable, but we are massively in the lead in terms of points. We have both capture zones. If now an enemy goes into a capture zone, we know where he is, and so we can then go for actions. And you can see here the reverse turning is not the best, but it is just a touch better than the frontal turning, especially because you don't run through all those gears. And there you can see accelerating, turning for 20 degrees, accelerating again, turning again, and so on. That is just a very step-by-step turning. I don't like that, but the tank just simply doesn't have the horsepower to turn ratio for it. That was the T-44 that was killed by the other Ferdinand, if I remember correctly. And now I'm going through the streets, and now I can actually see that the zone is decapped by the enemy, and there was no message that the enemy has stopped capturing, so I know that he must be there. And now I see a strafe going on from a plane, so that tells me he has to be somewhere there where the rockets landed, although I saw no ping on the map. And now I see the IS-2 and I have to make the call. He seems like his turret ring is damaged, and I make the shoulder shot where there is the ammunition, and when the shell enters I can splash all 4 crew members at once, and that actually secured me my 8th kill on the IS-2. And at this point there was not much left to do for me except for just simply observing the messages. Another IS-2 was killed, and I'm just simply capturing the zone with observing the front, and there is another German tank going into my direction, and that was the 3rd time that I captured a base. So I'm retreating out of here, and let's just say after that I got a disconnect. I got a random disconnect, so I cannot show you the full results. So I have to make a cut right here. And this is when I went back into the hangar, and here you can see actually the battle results. I got 72,000 silver lines and 5,233 research points with a 10% research point booster. Now you can also look up certain other results when you look at your replays. So you saw 8 kills, 3 capture zones and 0 deaths was the result of this battle on Normandy. So that's it for me today. I know it has been a very long tank review with a lot of gameplay, a lot of rambling, a lot of details, but I think the tank is truly worth it, and I hope I could spark your interest in one of the old veterans of War Thunder. Finally, that's it for me today, so thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this fantastic tank in your opinion when you have to face it on the battlefield. Do you think it still can hold up to the meta, or is it finally obsolete? And yeah, give the video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.